Welcome to Mississippi, considered the worst state in the Union by, well, just about everyone. But that won't stop me from taking a look at their malls. And to start, let's have a look at the mall at Barnes Crossing. It looks like it's doing alright, but I get the feeling that this mall has some cracks to it. I'll explain more as we walk. The mall at Barnes Crossing is actually the third mall to arrive on the scene in Tupelo, and would wind up being the mall killer to these other two, known as the Tupelo Mall and the Downtown Mall. With the $65 million mall being built in 1990 by David Hocker and Associates, it would pull McRae's away from the Tupelo Mall as a new anchor, while Kmart, Belk, JCPenney, and Sears would sign on, bringing the anchor lineup to a very strong start, while Tupelo Mall and Downtown Mall floundered. If my notes don't betray me, Downtown Mall would be gutted and reconfigured to become an all-purpose enclosed arena, featuring monster truck rallies and ice skating or hockey events, among other things. Meanwhile, Tupelo Mall would transition to specialty shops in 1994, before eventually becoming a business center called Midtown Point. We will talk about Midtown Point in a future video. Kmart would end up closing early on at the Barnes Crossing Mall in 1996, and McRae's would set up a home goods and men's clothing department in the vacant space. Their original pad would remain operational in the form of cosmetics, women's, and children's apparel. Meanwhile, Belk would close its doors to become a Parisian. And while on the subject, Belk made some interesting moves going into the 2000s, eventually absorbing the Parisian and converting all of the nameplates to Belk in 2007. The Barnes Crossing location would wind up closed, however, as Belk already had a dual anchor presence at the mall when they acquired McRae's in 2005. Company moves and acquisitions are difficult to follow at times, but that's the oversimplified version. The old Parisian pad wouldn't sit vacant for too long, as 2008 would see Dick's Sporting Goods open in its place. Meanwhile, Barnes & Noble would open a new location and expand existing space to make way for their operations, among smaller tenants that were also coming in. Even Ulta Beauty wanted a piece of that Tupelo pie. The only major flaw to the mall at this time appears to be the closure of Sears in February 2019, which is something that surprises nobody. Honestly, it's more surprising that they still exist at all today, given the way they're managed and handled. But something else I've noticed, which is a bunch of smaller flaws, is that there is a vacancy rot starting to form in this mall. It's not terrible, but it's nowhere near as high as it should be. At this time, Brookfield owns and manages the mall, and it's unknown what plans they have for the mall going forward. For those who share similar interests to me, I would advise keeping an eye on this mall for the future. Look at how plain this Belk facade is. I am a little disappointed in the mall interior. The exterior looks great if you saw on the once around, but this interior, man, it is plain, sterile, and kinda boring. And that reflects in the Belk facade, which looks more akin to a Rose's discount store. But for what it is, you still have a few decent shops here and there, but they are rather spread out. And even for a Tuesday evening, it doesn't seem like a lot is happening right now. Let's focus on Tupelo. While Mississippi is statistically considered the third worst state in the Union as of the making of this video, I won't go into detail. Tupelo is that silver lining to a dark storm cloud. And looking at some of the numbers for this big town, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but let me put it this way. If you had to live in Mississippi, Tupelo would look like your best bet. You have actual health care. Cost of living is dirt cheap. The schools are not amazing, but okay. Employment and crime do need work, although something I have noticed is that in the crime statistics, while violent crime is low for many parts of Mississippi, Tupelo included, property crime is downright insane. So yeah, it's got problems, but considering the rest of the state, you could do much worse than Tupelo. I hear Hattiesburg isn't that bad either, but I don't know that yet. Now, if you do end up in Mississippi, just stay out of Jackson for a while. Now, I will say this, in my limited interactions in Mississippi, the people were actually quite nice, pleasant, and laid back. The Whataburger in Vicksburg had perhaps the nicest fast food staff I've seen. As for Whataburger itself, I'll hold my thoughts until we get there. Southern hospitality seems to still be alive in parts of Mississippi, regardless of what some Northerners and even some Florida men tell me. I'm gonna go into some personal stories about this trip. If you don't want to hear that, well, you can mute and put on your own soundtracks for the next 2 minutes. For those of you who remember the teaser video, you know that a lot of things had went wrong on this trip. Stood up by a friend, yelled at in quite a few places, someone trying to leak my whereabouts. 2 of them actually. Going to Atlanta. Many assume getting stood up was the worst, and while I admittedly took it personally, if you ask me, the worst by far was what came with me in Atlanta. An illness that had me out of it and scaling back my interactions with people. It might not look like it, but I was trying rather hard to not fall over while taking this footage, and later that night in the hotel, it all came to a head when I wound up vomiting, and I could not get any sleep at all. And there I was, put with a dilemma. Do I go back home, which is 10 hours away already? Or do I minimize human interaction, double down on hand sanitizer while pressing on? Needless to say, I took the latter and I pressed on. But that illness basically tarnished the rest of the trip for me. I couldn't enjoy food until a week later. I couldn't step out of my introvert shell to talk with people. And I had to cross Mississippi, a 4-hour drive on my route, with 0 sleep. And if that wasn't enough, I was dumb enough to stop in Jackson. Now, at the end of the day, I ask for no pity, and I don't want any sorries. I just want to get my point across in how bad this road trip actually went. And I can't afford to just give up on this when I've already committed. And before any of you start yelling at me, I can assure you this wasn't this virus. Let's get back on subject. Under different circumstances, despite the uninteresting interior, I could picture myself liking this mall for what it was at the time. Is it perfect? No. Does it have problems? Of course. I guarantee some of you are highlighting and fixating on those problems right now. But at the end of the day, it still has a couple worthwhile things to its name. You have your traditional mainstays and a Barnes & Noble, and I know I didn't show some of the food court, but it actually has options and a little bit of the expected variety to it. Now the question is, can it pick itself up from the rut that it's slipping into? Tupelo is growing, but between downtown, the established retail corridor around the mall, and yes, online shopping is a factor too, the mall at Barnes Crossing is going to need to do some outside-the-box thinking and maybe even reinvent itself. Some malls have pulled it off, so never say never. Until next time, Tupelo, Mississippi, this is Doomie Grunt wishing you, and the mall at Barnes Crossing, farewell, and have a better night than I did. How is it some of the worst states in the Union end up being my favorites? First West Virginia, now Mississippi.